Hello and welcome to Up Dog Sports Talk. We are a sports show that does things differently. We like to talk about everyone in the sports landscape, specifically, of course, today, college football. We'll be talking about the SEC, and with that, we brought on a friend of ours who very similar podcast where they like to talk about all of the teams in college football. Mitch from the Three Tech Pod has joined us. Mitch, introduce yourself.
Yeah, hey Justin, glad to be here. As you mentioned, Three Tech Pod is our show. I run that with two of my buddies. We all have backgrounds in covering sports, and specifically my background is working in college athletics. I worked in three different front offices and even worked in the MLB for a little bit. And so fun to bring kind of our fandom and the business side of sports, a true look behind the curtain of what it takes to run a college football program and combine that into one podcast. So really thrilled to be on with you tonight and talk a little SEC.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a long time coming, and I know as an Aggie alum, so obviously it was a great time to go ahead and have you on. So we usually like to talk about all of the teams in college football, but we talk about everyone from top to bottom. So tonight is the SEC show, but we'll be talking about everyone in the conference. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up this tier list here, kind of show you where it feels like things will fall. And Mitch, I think we could go ahead and start from the top here. The championship contenders. When you look at this list, are there any surprises on?
No, I don't think so. I think those are the three teams that you're going to have as a part of that upper echelon. I think, LSU could certainly make a case to be there. We're kind of waiting on Ole Miss to break through. I think you've got a very apropos title for that second grouping there. I think every once in a while you're going to see a team like Florida or Oklahoma or heck, even Missouri and South Carolina have put a lot of pieces together over the last couple of years, and so every once in a while you'll see them mentioned. But when we're talking about off the jump, get off the bus at media days, who do you expect to win the SEC? I think for 2025, it's a pretty safe bet that the favorites are Georgia, Texas, and Alabama, and obviously excited to dive into each of those teams.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll kind of start it out this way. We might have to start out a little bit of a negative. Which, if one of these three teams disappoints, which I feel like with the expectations of these programs, disappointment is barely missing the college football playoff. Which one of these three do you think carries the biggest risk of a disappointing season?
Well, you set me up for failure by mentioning that I am a Texas A&M graduate. But I think the answer here is Texas, and I think that's for a couple of reasons. I think Arch Manning certainly has an extremely high ceiling, but we haven't seen what that floor is going to look like over a 12-game stint, right? He came in, he had a couple of starts when Quinn Ewers was hurt last year. He certainly had his packages and his moments throughout the rest of the regular season, and there's no doubt that Arch is going to succeed. I fully believe that he will be a star quarterback for the Texas Longhorns over the next 2 years. I'm certainly not in the camp that believes he's going pro after the 2025 season. And so when I look at this Longhorn team, I actually think they're more of a contender for the 2026 national championship than I do here in 2025. Aside from the quarterback questions, I think you have to look at the offensive line that's replacing a lot of talent, a lot of starts up front. And then also on the defensive line, they have been known for their physicality, and a couple of NFL draft picks like T'Vondre Sweat are no longer on the roster. And so we just assume that the Longhorns are reloading at both positions because of how well they've recruited from the high school ranks or how well they've done in the portal. But as Florida State taught us just a couple of, I guess, last season, right? Their 2-10 campaign. You live by the portal, you can die by the portal as well. And so anytime a championship contender tries to plug and play with those holes, naturally I'm just going to be a little bit skeptical until I see it actually on the field.
Absolutely. And the trenches can really make or break a team. It's not something that we like to talk about in the preseason. When it's the preseason, we want to talk about, oh, Arch Manning, he's going to be great. And we want to talk about exciting wide receivers who are going to make a step forward and stuff. But in all reality, like where, especially in this conference, where you can make or break your season is absolutely in the trenches. For me, when I look at this, I'm not going to pick on Texas anymore, so I'll go with Georgia on this question. I think when you look at the Bulldogs, the one area where I'm concerned is, are we starting to see Kirby kind of lose the script a little bit? We obviously we could put the off the field stuff kind of aside for this, even though I know that definitely plays a part. But we saw this Georgia team last year just look very, very sloppy. They offensive line missing assignments, receivers dropping passes. It was rather shocking to see Georgia look the way they did. They had a hard time with Georgia Tech to end the year, the wild 8 overtime game. And then finally they entered college football playoff, and Notre Dame kind of dominated that game from start to finish. And you saw Kirby Smart, instead of talking about how his team needed to play better, how they needed to improve to their standard, he kind of went after the college football playoff committee instead, saying, "Hey, these guys don't know what they're doing," and kind of stuff like that. What do you think about that, Mitch?
I do wonder what it's like in the locker room between the hedges right now, because they did have some moments where they were very uncharacteristic of what a Kirby Smart team normally looks like, physically, mentally, and it showed in execution down the field, as you mentioned. It was crazy to watch them throttle Clemson 34-3 at the beginning of the regular season, and then deal with those drops, deal with the offensive line not being able to hold up, not being able to rush the ball consistently all season. And then ending the way that it did, even though they won an SEC championship, they went 11-3 last year. They aced, for the most part, the most brutal schedule in college football. And I made the point on our show when we previewed Georgia that Kirby, the arrests aside, I can't explain that. I truly have no idea what on earth is going on, that the Georgia Bulldogs are losing both current players and high school recruits to the penitentiary. I mean, it is truly a bizarre and unfathomable situation, and Smart's got to get a handle on that. There's no doubt about it, because his program will die quickly or slowly if that continues. But I made the point that I wonder if Kirby kind of has us in the media right where he wants us, where, we made the jokes 2 years ago that he was in the locker room saying everybody thinks you're going 7-5, and obviously that wasn't true. But now he kind of gets to use that as actual motivation for his team, that, hey, they don't believe in you guys in the trenches. They don't believe in the wide receiver core. They think you're going to lead the country in drops again. They don't believe in the quarterback situation. And for me, it's like, man, this might be primed for Kirby to kind of return to prominence and maybe seize that number one spot in the country all over again.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And again, like, that's kind of the one thing, when you look at it, it didn't feel like the same team, but at the same time, they still went through a tough schedule. They still won the SEC, but and so while I'm probably more inclined to lead towards Georgia winning the SEC again, being a top seed in the college football playoff, I your point there about players getting arrested and stuff, that's why to me they kind of carry also the biggest risk. Just because I think a team carries a big risk doesn't mean I don't think they're going to do well, but that definitely is something that you need to factor in. I mean, we saw last year where we saw Oklahoma State, a very dramatic example where Ollie Gordon got in trouble, and then Gundy made his weird statements, and you saw the team fall apart. So off the field discipline does matter in this case. But we'll pivot from there, and we'll go to the last team on this list, Alabama. We did not, neither one of us had them as a possible risky team, so they must be ironclad, right?
Man, I am very close to being all in on the Tide this year. And I know that there's a big question at the top with quarterback play, and is Ty Simpson going to be able to step in and be the guy from day one? But you look at what Alabama has around the roster and around that quarterback spot, and I think it starts with the offensive coordinator and Ryan Grubb coming back to join Kalen DeBoer. He and Grubb have done tremendous things in their careers together. Obviously took Washington to the national championship, and DeBoer was primed to have Grubb join him in Tuscaloosa. That was going to be a package deal, and the Washington Husky offense was coming to Tuscaloosa, and then Grubb got hired by the Seattle Seahawks. And you had a situation where Jalen Milroe, a very talented athlete, probably did not fit the mold for what DeBoer ideally wanted to be able to do with his offense. Jalen just wasn't a pure passer. He wasn't equipped to run DeBoer's offense the way that he'd grown accustomed to over these so many years of success. And so now you get a guy who can stand tall in the pocket, is not going to look to run immediately, and will probably facilitate this offense in the way that Kalen dreams it up and Ryan Grubb dreams it up. I think the offense is going to be absolutely electric for Alabama. And, I think that the defense is deep and talented enough to figure it out, right? At times we wondered last year if they were going to be dropping off from the Saban level performances, and obviously, losing to Vanderbilt. Not a great showing for the defense there, right? They had some scares in the year. They get drubbed by Michigan, just out physicaled. But I think this year, after an off season, a chance to look themselves in the mirror, a chance to really buy in for year two. I'm a big fan of what Alabama's doing. I think that the Tide are going to be right back at the top this season.
Yeah, absolutely. You put it perfectly. I'm in the same boat as you. I think Alabama is for sure on the rise back. It was for those that don't like Alabama, it was a fun year, kind of watching them struggle a little bit. But guess what, guys? Try to deny the inevitable all you want, but the Crimson Tide are back. They're definitely going to be a top contender in this conference, and really one of my favorites to win it for sure. So moving on from the championship contenders, we saw the top three teams. My bold, maybe not that bold pick is that I believe with 100% certainty the SEC champion is coming from those three in that top category. The reason why is, of course, we look at recent SEC champions, for the most part, other than an outworldly run by LSU in 2019. It's been mostly Alabama and Georgia. And then you got the newcomers, Texas, with that loaded roster of theirs. So, Mitch, I guess my question for you is, why don't we see a huge variety in SEC champions?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's one that Rhett Lashley certainly made headlines with at ACC Media Days this week, where he questioned the depth of the SEC by saying, the same couple of teams win the conference every year are the real contenders to win the conference. And so in his mind, that's not depth. And listen, I love Rhett Lashley. I love what he's doing at SMU. I'm a big believer in the pony up movement. That was a misstep. There was just no reason he should have said that because on one hand, yes, you've only had the Alabamas and Georgias and LSUs of the conference win this league over the last couple of years. On the other hand, though, there's insane depth in this conference on a year-to-year basis. And so I think on one hand, you have the programs that really took advantage of the modern era of recruiting in LSU, in Georgia, in Alabama. There's a level of coaching at these programs historically over the last 20 years, right, where I just don't know that many other teams in the SEC can hold a candle to it. And to be honest, I think there's just that, at least with all three of them, there's the Nick Saban effect. Nick Saban was a diamond in the rough, right? A gem, the best coach to ever do it in college football, in my opinion. The other two teams and programs in this championship contender tier are offshoots of his coaching tree. Kirby Smart was his defensive coordinator. I mean, basically lived with the guy day in and day out for a number of years. Steve Sarkisian had the healing hands of Nick Saban's rehab clinic put on him. And, you guys, if you're not in Texas, you may not get it, but the Dave Campbell's Texas Football magazine came out just a couple of weeks ago. And in it, they had a feature on Steve Sarkisian where they talked about his journey through Alabama. And, Sark is a guy, obviously, with a little bit of a checkered past, right? And some failed coaching tenures at USC and Washington and some off-the-field issues. And so when he arrived at Alabama, he was all set to go be an analyst for Fox Sports. He was going to go do TV. And Saban told him, nope, you love football. You want to coach football. Come here, figure out how to do it the right way, and I promise you it'll pay off. And he said he made something like $40,000 or something like that in his first year. I mean, it truly was like an internship for Steve Sarkisian. But he learned how to break down film, and he learned how to coach guys the Nick Saban way. And I think it's impossible to say that that's not a major factor with either of these head coaches when you look to Alabama's left and you look to their right, and it's Texas and Georgia that are up there in the championship contender tier.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense for sure. Yeah, it's very weird because we go through the other conference previews. Like the previous episode was the Big 12, and it's like, well, you can go three, four tiers down. You could still find a champion down here, but the SEC, it's a different animal, and really, it is these programs here that are at the top. Good luck trying to stop them because they are a train that is hard on the tracks. So we'll move on here to our next category. And I gave this one a fun title. I titled it The Glass Ceiling because these two are very similar. Brian Kelly and Lane Kiffin both have had very talented teams. Teams that definitely have the talent that are capable of doing just about anything, but they just can't seem to get out of their own way. For Brian Kelly, it's winning the big games and falling short in those situations. For Lane Kiffin, it's been sometimes he wins big games, but then if he does, there's the home loss to Kentucky or the weird play calls on fourth down and the loss to Florida. So I guess we'll lead it off this way. We'll lead it off on the positive this time. If one of these two finds their way out of this category, who do you think it will be?
I think it's going to be LSU, mostly because it's it's a team that continues to confound me how they underachieve, right? The talent is there. They added Blake Baker on the defensive side last season to coordinate that defense that had just been putrid in 2023. So all arrows are pointing up, right? You've got one of the best quarterbacks in the country, an experienced vet who's going to be a successful NFL gunslinger. The wide receivers are loaded. The running game should be both just thunder and lightning. Between the tackles, outside the box, I think they're going to be an absolute handful. And then you give Blake Baker another year, another offseason to get right, to get that defense cohesive, to try and improve the secondary that's been extremely leaky these last couple of seasons. Harold Perkins is going to be unleashed back in that off-ball linebacker role. I think you're going to see him get to move all over the field and just truly be a guy that they plug and play. And most importantly, let go get the quarterback. That was what we missed from Perk after that sensational freshman season. It's felt like they haven't used him in the role that he's obviously suited for. And then you saw like Anthony Hill and Colin Simmons for the Longhorns early on in their career just get told, hey, go get the passer. You'll figure out how to play linebacker. We'll teach you that in time, but just go get the quarterback. And I'd like to see some more of that from Perk this year.
Yeah, absolutely. But if they don't get themselves out of this category, what do you think? What do you think will be the reason for that this time? Like, what shortcomings will Brian Kelly manage to do?
Yeah, so I'm mostly nervous about two things. One, just the Brian Kelly effect, where they do seem to come up short in the biggest moments. And even, it's not just the biggest moments. I mean, he's lost to my Aggies in 2 of the 3 years. One of those years, Texas A&M finished 5-7 and missed a bowl game. And sure, LSU was already locked into the SEC championship game, but their playoff run ended essentially when they lost to Texas A&M in that season finale, and didn't just lose, but got boat raced. They were blown off the ball on both sides of the line of scrimmage. So there's that I just inherently don't trust Brian Kelly as a head coach until proven otherwise. Secondly, on the field, I do worry about the offensive line. They're replacing 4 starters that are gone to the NFL. They're replacing their tackles. Anytime you have to do kind of a wholesale line change up front, that's always going to make me a little bit nervous. And, I've referenced this a number of times. I know there were a lot of us that were nervous about Oklahoma making the transition to the SEC last year, right? And one of the points that we focused in on was a brand new offensive line. And Sooner fans wanted to tell me, well, those are extremely talented guys. Bill Bedenbaugh is coming in. He's the second coming of offensive line gurus. But sometimes you just can't beat Father Time. And it takes those reps together and that time spent in the trenches together to gel an offensive line unit. And when you have LSU going to Clemson to start the year, there's no time for that unit to get those bullets flying around them before they have to come up with a big win. Not to mention the fact that LSU can't win an opener under Brian Kelly. So if there is one glaring weakness, I think, on this team, it's probably the offensive line. Can they get things going in time for conference play? Yeah, probably. We see that all the time, but that's certainly the biggest question mark I have about the Bayou Bengals.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and that's a big one. Again, we mentioned earlier with Texas as well. The offensive line is a huge key, and this it's a tough test to begin because you're going up against probably multiple first round offensive linemen in the Clemson Tigers to start out the year. So it truly is, in by all accounts, trial by fire in that one. Um, so pivoting to Ole Miss now, if this team does it, if this is finally the Lane Kiffin team that makes it happen and gets themselves in contention, makes the college football playoff, what is the reason they get it done?
That's a good question. I think the offense is going to have to carry this Ole Miss team, and I think it's going to be Austin Simmons being the perfect quarterback to run Lane Kiffin's offense, right? One of the misconceptions that people have about Ole Miss's offense is that it's entirely predicated through the air. And over the last couple of seasons, when you look at their dispersion statistically, Kiffin's offense actually starts on the ground, right? And so you had Quinshon Judkins, and you've had a number of very talented backs go through the Grove. But this year, they've got a true dual threat quarterback in Austin Simmons, who has a cannon for an arm. He's extremely cerebral. He's just 19 years old. He's already graduated with his undergraduate from Mississippi, and he can get it done on the ground as well. And so, the easy comparison that's been thrown around a lot is he's the next Cam Newton or he's the next Tim Tebow. And I think on one hand, you can certainly see those physical comparisons with his size and stature. But on the other hand, I think that this kid's going to need time to learn. And so I don't know what the on-ramp to success looks like for Simmons, but because of how he handled his moments last year, specifically coming into that Georgia game when Jackson Dart turned the ankle and it looked like that game was over before it even got started, Simmons leads a complete drive and they put points on the board, and obviously Dart comes back in and finishes that out and they upset the Georgia Bulldogs. But to me, I have some questions on the defense, but I think that offense should be just raring to go once again. And I think if there is a moment that we look back at and go, this is why Ole Miss made the playoff. Maybe in years past, we watch an Ole Miss quarterback turn the ball over. You mentioned their questionable play calling against Florida or the inexplicable loss to Kentucky last year. And some of that just frankly was on the shoulders of Jackson Dart. He had a nice season, had a very solid career, a great career at Ole Miss. But there's no doubt in moments he would make an errant throw that would cost them the game, or he would stall a drive. Maybe there's a next gear that Austin Simmons can hit and ultimately propel the Rebs into the playoffs.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I do think you kind of started on that a little bit, but I would say on my side, and I'll ask you in a moment if you agree, probably the biggest risk of this team is they did lose a lot of talent. There was a lot of guys that are now in the NFL from last year's team. So that's where I kind of look at them and I'm like, did you guys miss your chance here? So what do you think about that? And what else do you see as a big risk point for this team other than, I think you already kind of referenced defense a little bit.
Yeah, so on our show, when we did the previews, we had the Jimmies and the Joes power rank every team in the conference, and they had Ole Miss at 10th. And so I think part of the reason why it feels like our listeners are a little bit nervous about Ole Miss is all the turnover on that defensive side. They had an NFL line going after the quarterback and stopping the run last year. They were just clinical with how they stopped the run. This year, they've got to replace all of that. And, they've certainly got a lot of talent, but as we talked about with Texas, anytime you turn over the line of scrimmage to that degree, I'm going to have questions about it. On top of that, it felt like they did not beef up the trenches quite as effectively through the portal with the names and the star caliber that they did heading into the 24 season. as they did this offseason. So, I did write in our written preview that one of the key storylines was, is this the year that the portal catches up to the king? And I think that's a fair question to have. Trey and I both had that question, actually. When you just look at the roster and go, yeah, it's good, but is it a playoff contender? I don't know.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny to look at this tier because it kind of feels like Brian Kelly kind of took the Portal Kings fire a little bit with how many portal additions LSU made.
Yeah, LSU went hard in the portal. There's no doubt. They had very similar to Texas Tech. It felt like they had some people behind the scenes say, enough. We are not doing good enough, and we need to be chasing championships, not 8-4 records. And so LSU certainly pushed all their chips into the middle of the table. And I think if we're comparing LSU and Ole Miss, you ask the question of, do I expect one team over the other to break through the glass ceiling? Quite frankly, I think LSU has to. Otherwise, the temperature on Brian Kelly's seat continues to turn up. I think there are questions of maybe how the athletic department is being run. Quite frankly, with Scott Woodward, he came in promising championships when he was poached from Texas A&M, and there are some undelivered promises there on the football side, and that LSU fan base is rabid, man. I mean, they expect to go 12-0 just about every single season. So anytime that you're not even reaching Atlanta, there are going to be some unhappy fans on social media, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. The pressure's heating up big time on the Tigers this year. But we'll move to our next category here. I called this one the might make a run at the playoff spot. I don't think these teams are going to win the SEC by any means, but with a 10-2 season, which is very possible for any of these teams, with the right combination of things going on, they could definitely reach the college football playoff as an at-large team. So when you look at this list, who sticks out to you first as a team that might make a run to the playoff?
I think it's got to be Missouri, and this was one that we had a bone to pick with our listeners because they ranked Missouri way down in the SEC. It felt like with the change at quarterback and Luther Burden being gone, it felt like a lot of listeners kind of punted on Missouri. Eli Drinkwitz has a chance to get over 10 wins for the third straight season, I believe for the first time in Missouri's history. He's been eccentric, eclectic. He's had some interesting strategies and styles, but the man has won over the last couple of years. And as quirky as he might be, it's been working for the Tigers. This year, you look at that roster specifically on defense, and it is frightening. Their edge rushers are going to be absolutely incredible. Zion Young, they've got Damon Wilson, the second, coming up from Georgia. He transfers in. Their secondary is basically all back. And they've found a way to win one-score games over these last couple of seasons. On the offense, they've got Ahmad Hardy that's going to come up and run the ball for them. They've got a kid coming up from Mississippi State who's going to take over Luther Burden's spot. And, Bo Prabula was a highly touted quarterback recruit at Penn State. A lot of Nittany Lions fans were kind of wanting to see him get some action when Drew Aller maybe was having a couple games where he was throwing for less than 200 yards. And so now we get to see if Bo is worth the hype. And so that and the schedule is very forgiving, Justin. I mean, gosh, they get all of their toughest games pretty much at home this year. It just feels like if Missouri is going to do it, this is the season that they put it all together.
Yeah, that was actually a team I was thinking of as well because they are. It's very weird to see an SEC team go underrated these days, but that is this team. In terms of their returning production, how good of a coach Drinkwitz is, this team has gone very under the radar compared to what they probably should be. And you mentioned the schedule. They don't hit the road for the first time until mid-October, which is astounding. And momentum is a huge part in the game. Staying at home every single week and getting more time to, either hit the film, work out, or, get your classes out of the way so you can focus on football, that kind of stuff. Having all of that at home for the first month, for basically like half the season, is very favorable for the Tigers.
Yeah, it sure is. And they've gotten better at home. Justin, just a couple of years ago when that defense was dreadful and they couldn't stop a nosebleed through the air or on the ground, home field advantage meant nothing to them. And to their credit, they have certainly turned that around. And I feel like defending Columbia now has started to become one of the things that they're known for, which goes hand in hand with what Drink is building up there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So if we, I guess we move on to another team here, maybe we'll go the other direction. If which one of these teams could potentially have a really disappointing season? And we're looking at, we kind of got Missouri out of the way, so now we have the other three here. I think any of these fan bases would be very disappointed if their team kind of fell apart a little bit. Which one do you think that possibly could be?
I think it's Tennessee. South Carolina is also a contender here for me just because there's so much hype around the Gamecocks, and after a 9-3 year and, quote unquote getting snubbed for the playoff, there's a lot of fuel on that fire for South Carolina. I've got questions about who's around Lenora Sellers this year. The offense is replacing like all of their rushing production. I don't know that they have a wide receiver that I just truthfully trust quite yet. And there's a lot of new faces that are going to be on that defensive side as well. They sent a lot of production to the NFL last year. So it feels like it's a lot of positive momentum for South Carolina. But if I look at one team and go, I think they're going to way underachieve, for me, it's Tennessee. The quarterback situation is what it is. And Joey Aguilar coming in, I think he's going to be solid for the Vols, but at his worst, he throws the ball away way too frequently. He was throwing interceptions like they were candy at times during his tenure at Appalachian State. And so now you go up in competition into the SEC that has some of the best secondaries in the country, and suddenly I start to worry what that transition is going to look like. They also, I just don't know that they have a lot of truly proven playmakers on the offense as well. They lost a lot to the NFL. They're going to need like redshirt freshman Braylon Staley to step up. They're going to need Mike Matthews to step up, sophomore wide receiver. Dylan Sampson is gone. He was the heart and soul of that offense. Deshaun Bishop is the guy that's taking over at running back, and he certainly had his flashes. I don't think that Tennessee has like a 6-6 year, but I do hear them talked about in the playoff discussion, and I think more 8-4 is realistically where I net out on the Vols.
Yeah, and really what surprised me even last year, kind of going into this year, it felt like for a while they were a wide receiver, or early on in the Heupel era, they're kind of a wide receiver factory. The image of Jalen Hyatt going for 5 touchdowns in Alabama comes to mind. But then last year, even though they had a decent amount of the receivers back, like the receivers just weren't a huge factor anymore. And that was really surprising to me. Now they kind of go with a youth movement here. That can either be good or bad, depending on how all that shakes out. I do think their defense is going to be good. I could see them being solid, but again, I don't like that Alabama and Florida are on the road. Those are places that have been nightmare fuel for the Vols, and playing Georgia in general has been a nightmare for them lately. So you almost chalk them 3 losses right there, and then there's no margin for error the rest of the way. But my big disappointment, I'm actually going to circle us back to South Carolina. We see Lenora Sellers. He's an exciting young playmaker, and first team preseason All SEC, by the way. How about that for him? But this is kind of one of those situations where I feel like we could end up at the end of the year kind of looking at South Carolina wondering, okay, did we overlook all of this other stuff because we were excited about how they finished and Lenore Sellers? And that's what I could possibly see with this team. There's that factor. There's also the fact that we haven't really seen Shane Beamer string together 2 good seasons yet. We got the initial exciting run. We saw this exact same thing happen almost a few years ago. I think that was 2022 when they ended the year hot, blew out Tennessee, beat Clemson on the road, and then we were all excited about them heading into the next year, and then the offensive line was a swinging gate against North Carolina in the opener, and that's all she wrote for that team. So we haven't seen them string together multiple good years. So that's kind of why I'm on that team. And that's even before we get to the schedule that includes one of the most brutal 5 game stretches in the country.
Yeah, it's not forgiving for the Gamecocks. They're going to have to find that identity early. They're going to have to get Sellers some support, and they're just going to have to get him comfortable. Man, you saw by the end of the year, once he felt, and the offensive line wasn't exactly the Great Wall of China in front of him last year, but it felt like as he got more comfortable and as he kind of grew into his role as QB1, when they beat Texas A&M at home, the Gamecocks broke 28 tackles in that ball game, and it just felt like there was a confidence that came from playing well and playing at home and understanding what they wanted to do schematically. That's going to be what I think South Carolina has to hit the ground running this season if they want to pay off those playoff aspirations.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one good thing for Gamecocks fans is at least the early portion of the schedule is forgiving. So you have a little bit of time to get Sellers comfortable, find his best options, and build some momentum. But I think we wrap up now this category with one of your team, Texas A&M. Let's kind of just dive into them. What do you think there might be hope for a playoff run here, or
It's a good question. I think they have to beat Notre Dame early, right? Week 3 of the season this year? I can't remember if it's 2 or 3 off the top of my
week
head,
three?
but yeah. So they get 2 warm-ups. They get UTSA, which will not be a cakewalk at home, and then they get Utah State in a battle of the Aggies. Texas A&M has, I believe, the best offensive line in the conference coming back. All 5 starters return. I think it's truly going to be a return to the Maroon Goons from yesteryear and from the years when I was in school. Adam Cushing, the offensive line coach, has done a tremendous job. The strength and conditioning has certainly improved. But so much of it's going to depend on what Marcel Reed can do in his first full season as the starting quarterback, right? We saw flashes. We saw his athleticism be put on display, and teams like Arkansas and LSU found that out the hard way. But when a team like Texas could match his athleticism at the linebacker position and they could contain Marcel Reed, not allow him to get outside the pocket, suddenly he was forced to become a downfield passer exclusively. And A&M did not have the wide receiver talent for that last year. They didn't have the speed. They could not get separation against any secondary worth their salt. They've fixed that through the portal. And Casey Concepcion comes over from NC State. Mario Craver comes over from Mississippi State. Terry Bussey is supposed to have a breakout season. Mike Elko has been promising that Aggie fans are going to be thrilled with what all they have him involved in this year. A kid that came as a 5-star athlete, Mr. Texas high school football, really could play anywhere. There were people saying that he was best at quarterback, at cornerback, at running back. He is fully focused on being an explosive wide receiver for this team. And then they've got 5-star Jerome Miles coming in as well, a 6'4" kid who can run just insane speed. So all of that to say, the offense should be much more athletic. They've got maybe the best running back room in the conference as well. It's 4 deep. And I think the defense, as long as they can improve in the secondary, I like the pieces that they brought to come get the passer. They have an increased presence off the edge. The question for me is, can they stop the run? They're a little bit smaller up front. That when you lose, Shamar Stewart and Shamar Turner and Nick Scorton, you're going to be a little bit smaller, just kind of inherently in the trenches. So again, what do they do to rotate guys? And they certainly have a lot of star talent. They've been recruiting at a very high level along that defensive line as well. So theoretically, it should be next man up, and they should have all these talented kids ready to fill the void. But it feels like a little bit of wait and see with Texas A&M. On top of the fact that, Justin, I mean, the Texas 8-4 jokes write themselves, right? And it is a tough schedule. They've got all of their most difficult games this year. They had it home last year. They're on the road this year. They have to go to South Bend. They have to go to Baton Rouge. They have to go to Columbia to play the Tigers. They have to go to Austin to play the Longhorns. It's just not a super forgiving schedule for Texas A&M. That's with home games against Florida and Auburn. So, 8-4, 9-3 feels pretty realistic to me. I would love to see them get to 9-3 in the regular season, pull off one of those upsets on the road, and then have a chance to win that 10th game in a bowl game and use 2026 as the year that you're really making a run at the playoff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're looking at there with especially the back end of the defense, I think more experience. You used it as a compliment earlier, but we could bring it back here. The South Carolina game obviously all really showed the big issues they had with missed tackles last
Mm-hmm.
year. And I think having all that experience back in the back end is going to at least shore that up. To it may not be perfect. Again, like you said, they're a little bit undersized up front, so that's kind of the next issue you have to overcome, especially in this conference. But I think we're looking at a pretty solid Texas A&M team here. They just need to they definitely need to steal one on the road in order to make a playoff run. But overall, though, I think we're looking at a team that I think could at least hit 9 wins and get past the 8-4 jokes.
It would be nice. It would make me and my family quite a bit happier during game days this Saturday. So we're rooting for it.
Next, we go to the chaos teams here. And I'll ask you in a moment if there's any surprises here, but these are the teams that I look at that could be pretty good. Some of them are in this category. I think it'll be pretty obvious when I say this, but some of them are in this category because their schedule might be too tough to make a playoff run, but they could get in a better team's way, or they're just simply teams that are just good enough to get in teams' way. So, is there any surprises in this tier? And when you look at it, who do you think is going to really create some havoc in this conference?
I think you set it up well because ordinarily I would look at Oklahoma and Florida and put them in the might make a playoff spot category. But because both of those schedules are just so difficult, it's hard to go even with as much respect as I have for both of those rosters, and I'm very high on both of those teams this year. It's hard to say that they win all of them or even half of a couple of those challenging games, whether they be at home or on the road, just because the SEC schedulers, excuse me, did them no favors last year. And last year in 2024 was brutal. 2025 is going to be equally as challenging. I think that out of these four teams, Oklahoma, Florida, Vanderbilt, and Auburn, I like those two the most. I trust the quarterbacks in both places. DJ Lagway is obviously a star in the making. John Mateer, I'm the founding member of Mateer's Privateers and have been a fan of his for a number of years now. And I like how they fit into both of those offenses. I think both teams have tremendous weapons out wide for him to throw to. I think they both have very, very solid defenses to rely on as well. So, yeah, if you have Florida or Oklahoma on your schedule this season, that is as uncomfortable a matchup as I think a lot of teams will find.
Yeah, absolutely. And Oklahoma's an interesting team to me because they really did revamp themselves by the portal. Kind of, added offensive coordinator Nick Arbuckle to kind of revamp the offense a little bit. But it's a team that I also wonder if they can string together stuff. This is kind of coming from a quick discussion that even came up during last episode. The problem with Oklahoma was a lot of times we saw them try to pass the ball to finish out games. And we know that Nick Arbuckle is a very pass happy offensive coordinator. But at some point, I mean, you brought in Jaden Ott, but are you going to remember to use him? And do you have the offensive line to use him to close out ball games? That's going to be a huge question for Oklahoma. Do you agree?
I do, and I think part of the reason why they couldn't lean on the running game last year was because the offensive line was so bad, and they had some terrible injury luck both up front and at the wide receivers. Obviously, it was walk-ons and scout team guys running out there in the second half of the year at wide receiver for the Sooners. But I think Ben is so creative at getting his quarterback in space. And so when you talk about the run game, it's not just going to have to be Jaden Ott, who's a tremendous piece. And I wish he'd finished his career at Cal, but obviously I understand why he left for greener pastures there. But Arbuckle is going to be able to keep the defense, I think, spread out. And so that will clear lanes for Jaden Ott. The offensive line should be a lot better. And then when they do decide to throw it in those late game situations, they've got the talent to do it, both at wide receiver and at tight end. So I just feel like the offense this year is so much more cohesive. Arbuckle comes in. It's not some co-offensive coordinator split. It's just Ben Arbuckle is going to run the show. He's got his guys that he's going to be able to curate this offensive game plan around. And yeah, I'm bullish on the Sooners this year, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and I want to see them be exciting and hopefully create some chaos in this conference. So it's a very fascinating team to watch. That's completely sure. And early game against Michigan is a game where we're really going to learn a lot about both teams, really. But the Florida Gators are one as well. I look at and I'm like, this team could be really interesting this year. Like they ended last year with a lot of momentum, and now they bring quite a few notable teams to the swamp. Like Texas has to make their first trip there, probably possibly ever. I don't recall the last time Texas would have gone there because obviously they haven't been in the same conference together. So that team is fascinating.
I love the Gators this year. And as much as I was out on Billy Napier last year, and to be honest, I'm not fully bought in that Napier is the difference maker that will get Florida over the edge. This roster is ridiculously loaded. I mean, you look at any side of the ball, any position group, and it's hard not to like what they're bringing back. Obviously, Lagway gets to be the unquestioned starter this year. He doesn't have to split time with Graham Mertz. He doesn't have to do the one drive in, one drive out. That was so frustrating to watch. Even as a team, a fan of a team that benefited from that. It felt like as Florida would start to get a shred of offensive momentum, maybe with Lagway against the Aggies early on in that game, here came Graham Mertz right back out to suck it all up. So Lagway being the unquestioned starter is a huge benefit to the Gators. And then I really like the playmakers. I mean, Trey Wilson out wide. He's joined by J. Michael Sturdivant from UCLA. They've got a couple of top 50 recruits in Vernell Brown III and Dallas Wilson that are coming in. The offensive line returns 4 starters. So, the Gator offense should be fully operational. And I know that they're replacing Austin Armstrong as the defensive coordinator, but that defense really started to round into form late in the season. It felt like they started to care. They started to understand what coverages they were running, and the communication got better. I don't know if you noticed, but as Florida played early on in the season, it felt like each position group was kind of doing their own thing. And when there was inevitably a bust on the back end or a linebacker wasn't the gap that he was supposed to be, it burned Florida for a big play and even a score. So at the end of the year, that defense started to feel like they were playing as a cohesive unit, and that's what I'm banking on heading into 2025.
Yeah, we kind of saw them towards the end of the year. We finally saw Florida kind of stop with the nonsense almost. Like, I feel like we've seen, like the Office meme where it's like 0 days since last nonsense or stuff like that. I felt like we've seen nonsense things from the Florida Gators for what feels like almost a decade now at this point. We've had, and we'll have to revisit all the history, but like we've had stuff like the shoe throw.
Mm-hmm.
2 years ago when they had Florida State with the backup quarterback on the ropes, 2 guys targeting at the same time and taking out the backup quarterback that actually ended up kicking Florida State out of the playoff. But it's just stuff like that we've seen with the Gators that I felt like we saw them clean up last year. So we'll move on from them. We'll jump to Auburn, which is an interesting one in this category. And I was actually kind of somewhat hesitant to put him here, but then I look at the schedule and I see they have Georgia and Alabama at home this year, so there's a chance they could create some chaos. What is your feel on the Auburn Tigers?
Don't like him. Not comfortable with him. I love the talent on the roster. I like the way that it's built, but there is something about Hugh Freeze and the quarterback situation being turned over to Jackson Arnold that I'm just not comfortable with. Auburn could be a 9-win team this year, and I would politely clap and say, congratulations, guys. Glad I wasn't along for that ride. The Auburn fan base, just lives and dies on every single down, and they've been underachievers over these last several seasons, and I don't know what it's going to take to get them over the hump. It feels like they should be winning a lot more than what they are, given the talent on the roster. But I think that Jackson Arnold he is a talented quarterback. I think he can be a successful quarterback. I think he can be a successful quarterback in the SEC. But until I see him be able to slow the game down and process it at a speed that it's going to take for a team like Auburn to be a winner in the SEC, I'm going to politely sit on the sidelines. You know, that was what got him in trouble in Norman last year. That was what got him benched. Was he started basically making bad calls at the line of scrimmage, bad adjustments out of plays that were called from the sideline based on him seeing ghosts or based on him misunderstanding what the defense was about to do. And it cost the Sooners in a couple of key spots in tight games. So that was why you saw Venables bench him early. Not to say that he can't turn it around, because again, I think was worthy of that 5-star rating coming out of Denton Guyer High School in North Texas here. But I'm gonna be a late adopter to that. I don't know that I'm jumping on the bus before I see anything.
Yeah, I'm with you. Watching that bus pass by, someone else can get on it. I'll gladly walk. Yeah, I when Jackson Arnold transferred, I kind of felt like he needed somewhere where he could build some confidence, and then he transferred to Auburn. I was like, oh no, Jackson, why here? And I mentioned this a few weeks back, and honestly, I did get some hate from Auburn fans. They're like, Hugh Freeze is a quarterback whisperer. And then I sent the list of Hugh Freeze's quarterbacks and did not hear back. So let's just say he has not been kind to his quarterbacks. He got the reputation because Chad Kelly was the kind of guy who had an ego, and he was the perfect guy to bring it down. That's the kind of quarterback. Honestly, I'm very surprised because he found his type and has not gone back to it. Like, come on, Hugh. Like, go back to. You found your perfect formula here with Chad Kelly. Go back to that. You look at the rest of this team, and it does look like it could be promising if they were to figure something out. Like, they got really good receivers.
They do. I mean, the receiving room might be the best in the conference. It's so scary with what they've got. Eric Singleton obviously comes over from Georgia Tech as a Yellow Jacket supporter. That was a tough blow. And so that with Cam Coleman and yeah, just truly a treasure trove of weapons out there on the plains. The offense should be really fun, but they're going to have a quarterback who can deliver the ball. I wouldn't wish the Peyton Thorne experience on my Auburn friends again, and I don't think we're going to get that, but to go from Peyton Thorne, who just did not have it, he was just not an SEC quarterback, to a guy that has the traits of an SEC quarterback, but hasn't proven it yet, hasn't shown that he can, like I said, slow the game down. It makes me a little bit nervous.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that one. So we'll go to our next chaos team here, and that is Vanderbilt. They obviously beat Alabama. That was their big moment last year. Diego Pavia has done a lot of talking this offseason, which, unpopular opinion, I actually kind of enjoyed it a little bit. Like, you are the underdog. Everyone looks at you that way. But I like to see the internal confidence, like, oh, no, we're going to be good. I mean, the rest of us are going to look at that and go, oh, come on, you're Vanderbilt. But, I mean, we haven't seen this out of anyone at Vanderbilt in many, many decades. I think you look at this team and they got a lot back. Like, I think it's bring some upsets, right?
I think they can, for sure. And I think that confidence that Pavia has, obviously well endowed with it on his own. Not a shy guy. But if you remember a couple of years ago at SEC Media Days, Clark Lee said our goal is to be the best team in the conference and the best team in the country. And everybody laughed at him because obviously you're Vanderbilt. And that's not likely, given so many different factors. But the fact of the matter is you can't beat Alabama. You can't upset Auburn on the road. You don't start out the season by shocking Virginia Tech if your players don't believe that they can do it. And Georgia State loss aside, there was a lot of confidence in Nashville for the first time in maybe ever. Certainly a long, long time. They've got 70% of their production coming back. This is absolutely a team that you don't want to see on your schedule. You certainly can't take that mental week off against the Doors. And I think they're certainly in contention to be one of those chaos teams. And do I think that they're going to beat Alabama and Auburn again this year? No, probably not. But then again, as long as you can get to a bowl game in Nashville, you probably sprung an upset or two to get to 6 or 7 wins. And so, yeah, I think Pavia and Eli Stowers, maybe the best tight end in the country, coming back are a great place to start there.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, don't forget the Pavia over Hugh Freeze hex that's been going on since Hugh Freeze is at Liberty. So they might be able to do it. And if they do, Vanderbilt has an all time winning record against Auburn. So shout out to that one. Moving on to our last category here. These are the teams that are just hoping to make a bowl. I'll probably, this might be a lob question here, but which one of these three do you look at and think that that team will definitely make a bowl game?
Ooh, definitely make a bowl game. It might be a stretch for any of these teams. Arkansas is the team that I'm closest to saying goes 6-6. I think the offensive numbers were skewed based off of what they did against Arkansas Pine Bluff last year, right when they scored 77. But there was an undeniable connection between quarterback and offensive coordinator, right? Bobby Petrino bringing Green down from Boise State. He had recruited him as a freshman at, what was it, Missouri State, I think.
Yeah.
So it was nice to see that connection pay off. And, Arkansas was able to get the ground game going just a little bit last year. But so much of that production that they relied on from a season ago is gone, especially at the wide receiver spot. Like, I just don't know who we're throwing to. If you're Arkansas, the defense has to replace some guys. Defense has not been, a championship caliber defense over the last couple of years. And then you throw in a difficult schedule as well. It's just, it's tough to me for me to buy stock in Arkansas this year, especially because I think Sam Pittman's time in Fayetteville has probably run its course. And I don't know how you feel about that, but I feel like Arkansas has a good coach. To win in the modern SEC, you need a great coach, and I don't think that's Sam Pittman.
Yeah, I think they saw for a little bit there, they thought they could see the idea where you bring in the CEO coach and it could work out. They were kind of one of the teams that tried to buy into that concept. And even though it feels like it would fit decently well for modern day college football because you have so much to manage off the field, it really hasn't worked out for this team. And there are some early results that felt like maybe this could work, and then it feels like it's all been kind of going downhill since then. And I think there's even pressure having former Arkansas coach Bobby Petrino back on the sidelines here. We wonder at some point could we end up seeing Bobby Petrino back at the top again as Arkansas's head coach, even in the interim fashion. Can you believe what a wild, strange trip that is?
That would be uncomfortable to put it lightly. And yeah, we would have to paper over a host of sins from years past. If they are going to save Sam Pittman's job, it's clearly by winning at home. They've got Texas A&M, they've got Auburn, they've got Missouri, all within the friendly confines. So I think if they are going to make that bowl game, they've got to make their hay. They've got to make it early, and they've got to win against teams that historically they just don't beat. They're 1-12 against Texas A&M. They've lost 4 straight matchups in Fayetteville against Auburn, and they're 2-9 against Missouri in that rivalry game since 2014. So, if you're trying to sell me a ticket to bet the over 5.5 on the Hogs, I'm probably going to ask you to take your business elsewhere.
Yeah, I agree. The only thing that gives me a little bit of hope was you mentioned the yardage before. The problem was like it kind of felt like they would move the ball up and down the field. They just couldn't do what was necessary to put points up on the board. And my main shining example of that was the Oklahoma State game where they could do whatever they wanted for most of the field, but then we didn't see the payoff with points on the board. Oklahoma State came back and won that game for which looked very strange in hindsight. So we'll move to Kentucky here. I think the main thing people are saying is, "Hey, Mark Stoops is motivated this year." Do we have any hope here for the Wildcats?
Oh man. Certainly not going to come from me. And I'm going to sound like a Kentucky hater here. We're of course talking about former Texas A&M head coach Mark Stoops there for about 30 minutes. Still one of the craziest nights doing our podcast and doing this brand, covering that and putting out a early report from Billy Lucci of Texags of basically breaking down the series of events that happened and went viral on Twitter and just had a bunch of discussions with Kentucky fans in our mentions. But Zach Calzada is a good quarterback. Former A&M gunslinger, did amazing things at UIW at the FCS level. He's a good quarterback. Did not get the chance to shine at Auburn. I don't think that was ever the fit for him. I didn't understand really why he went back to Auburn. But since then, he really has rounded himself out. And has thrown for over 6,000 yards and 53 touchdowns in his last 2 years at Incarnate Word in San Antonio. I don't know that I trust the offensive supporting cast. They've got Dante Dowdle, who comes in from Nebraska. They've got Seth McGowan, actually transfers from New Mexico State to probably be running back one there. Receiving core, a lot of questions. They lost their two best options to Nebraska and to LSU, Dane Key and Barry and Brown. So I don't know that there's a lot proven on the offensive side. The secondary, they bring back a couple of starters on that side, but the front seven is going to have to replace a lot of guys. They lose Keyshawn Silver to USC. I'm just wondering if a Kentucky team that's normally known for tough defense, very physical play, I just don't know if they have the guys to kind of replicate that and get Mark Stoops back to 6-7 wins this year.
Yeah. For me, when it comes to Kentucky, there's been enough of a pipeline now that I can look at the defense. Yes, there's not a lot of experience, but I feel like I can trust someone, maybe a guy or two, to pop up in the front seven and end up playing high level football. But for me, it goes back to the first point. The burden of proof is on the offense. Mm-hmm. And you covered running backs and receivers very well. The offensive line has been a major issue in Lexington for years now. And I really don't see where that's going to get better. So that's the other area I have a concern with this team. And then just with the offensive scheme in general, I think they brought in some new coaches there. Are you going to finally get with the modern age with this offense? Yes, you don't have to go and run the hurry up, or I definitely don't recommend passing the ball 50, 60 times a game, but you have to modernize the offense a little bit. It can't just be 3 yards in the cloud of dust up the middle. So that's what I want to see out of this team, but I'm not confident they can make a run to the bowl either. It feels like things are trending in a bad direction.
Yeah, I don't we made the joke that all Mark Stoops had to do was just kind of keep his head down, win 6-7 games a year, and he would never pay for another meal in Lexington. He would never need another job as long as he lived. And then he made the misstep of nearly leaving for College Station. And when he tried to come back and issue that statement, this is where I always want to be, and I'm home, suddenly it felt like he had broken that bubble. And now it's like Kentucky fans have woken up to the idea that, oh, wait, no, there could be more to our football program. We could do other things other than just 7, maybe 8 wins a season. And now that serenity has been shattered, suddenly it feels like Stoops is being treated with the expectations that come with being an SEC head coach and maybe the one place that had lagged behind everybody else. And now I wonder if he's squarely on the hot seat with another potential losing season staring at him in the face.
Yeah, absolutely. That Kentucky-Toledo game is going to be one to keep an eye on, because that one's one with a lot of stakes in both directions. Toledo, it's an opportunity for a huge win for Kentucky. If you lose to Toledo in that opener, your fan base is already out on the whole season.
Yep, no doubt.
And finally, we'll wrap this up with Mississippi State. Big portal class with this team, but there's a lot of work to do here. Give some hope here to Bulldogs fans. Find some ways to kind of what could help them improve a little.
Well, I think the hope is twofold. I think the team is full of athletes. This is going to be a very fast team. They're going to be able to speed-wise keep up with just about everybody else. Can they do that from a physicality standpoint? I don't know. I talked about Kevin Coleman Jr. leaving for Missouri. They lost Mario Craver to Texas A&M. They lost Bryce Pollock in the secondary to Texas Tech. So it was very much a go west young man type of mentality from the difference makers on that team a season ago. Now they get Fluff Bothwell, who comes up from South Alabama, first team all name squad in college football, and a very productive running back for the Jaguars last year. The guy that I think should inject the most amount of hope is freshman quarterback Kamario Taylor. Blake Shapen will be the starter to start the season. Luke Cromenhook is probably not going to sniff the field, the Florida State transfer. That just feels like a failed experiment, and I kind of wish he had never left Florida State. But Kamario Taylor is a kid that has true dual threat capability. He feels like a Michael Van Buren clone a little bit, but maybe a little bit more mobile. And so I hated to see Van Buren leave town for LSU. I thought he could have done special things in this offense, but Kamario Taylor might be able to step up into that void. And so if you're a Mississippi State fan, I think you're hoping for 3-4 wins this season, maybe spring an upset or two, and get a look at Taylor and see what the future of the program could look like.
Absolutely. Now, I think it's time to put pen to paper here. Let's do our SEC championship predictions. Who is your championship pick?
So I made this, I think, fairly clear earlier. I'm all in on the Tide this year, and I think Alabama should be able to have the horses to not only compete with a Georgia, as far as physicality throughout the conference slate. I think they should be able to weather a very tough schedule. The game that I'm most afraid of for Alabama is going to Williams-Brice in October, playing South Carolina on the road, and inevitably what will be a night game is a very difficult task. And so if they can beat Georgia, or if they can at least split those two games, I'll say that. If they can split those two games, I think they're in Atlanta. I think they earn a shot to play for the SEC championship. And I just like the direction that I think Alabama is heading with a more explosive offense. I think that'll take some of the pressure off the defense. And I like the Tide to hoist the trophy in Atlanta this year.
Nice. I'm going to go the same route, but I've got Alabama over Texas. I think Alabama does upset Georgia in Athens. The Alabama over Georgia hex continues. And then Texas makes it here by virtue of their easier SEC schedule. And I'll have Alabama beating Texas in the SEC championship. Finally, we'll wrap this with how many playoff teams from the SEC and who do you have making the playoff?
Yeah, so
from the SEC.
Right. I think I've got 4 from the SEC, and I think I think the most likely teams are Alabama, Georgia, Texas, and by virtue of the fact that I think their schedule is incredibly forgiving, I'm going to say the Missouri Tigers. LSU should be there. I'm going to be all kinds of frustrated with LSU if they can't get there, but LSU also has a difficult schedule ahead of them. And with the concerns I have around the offensive line and the head coach, I'm going to go with the Missouri Tigers to take that 4th playoff spot.
Ooh, I like that. I'm going to end up landing with 3 of them. I've got Georgia, Texas, and Alabama. I think everyone else just kind of beats each other up too much. We're going to end up with a gigantic mess of 3 lost teams again. And that kind of leaves them sitting on the outside with other conferences like the Big Ten potentially having 4 teams with 2 or less losses.
Yeah, love it.
It feels like with this new playoff era, like three might, unless we have a year of a lot of chaos, it feels like 3 might be that magic number where they look at it and go, I don't know.
Yeah, 3 to 4 certainly feels like the most comfortable of all outcomes. It should give us a really interesting debate come, October and November as we're getting closer towards those playoff selections. And, we'll see what this year does to throw added fuel onto the fire of the playoff restructuring. I was so happy, honestly, to hear that all of a sudden it all devolved into a bunch of arguments and they couldn't agree on any sort of single format for the 16 team expansion. I thought the 12 team era with the seeding adjustment was the perfect format, given the direction that they've taken the sport, right? I mean, if I just could snap my fingers and pick a playoff format, it would have been 8 teams, but to do 12, to make the scheduling, or I'm sorry, the seeding tweak to where there are no automatic conference championships, locked into certain seeds. I think that's the best possible solution. And let's gather some data, guys. Like, give it more
Yeah.
than 30 seconds before we decide to upend the sport all over again.
Yeah, this is why we're doing shows like this. We're helping get you, the fans, through this long off season. Just it has been an off season filled with just so much nonsense. Just so about the playoff, and it definitely is tiring. So Mitch, it was great having you on. Great to talk some football on the field. We're about 30 days away. We are exactly 30 days away as of this recording from college football kicking off for real. Mitch, obviously, I'm sure a lot of people already know where to find you because, if you're following us, I'm sure you're familiar with the Three Tech Pod. They do great stuff. But Mitch, go ahead and tell the fans where to find you.
Yeah, well, Justin, first of all, thank you for having me on. Just an absolute pleasure and a treat to talk ball with you. And yeah, you guys are doing some really fun things, not just with college football, but obviously across the spectrum as well. You can find us at 3Tech Pod on all of our social handles. Instagram and Twitter are certainly where we're most active on social media. And then we release, 2 to 3 episodes a week, depending on what part of the season or off season we're in. Spotify, Apple, over on YouTube as well. And if you like to read previews, if you like articles, we run a Substack as well that has been really fun to grow over this last off season. So would encourage you guys to check us out, and we'd love to talk ball with you.
Awesome, Mitch. Thanks for coming on. It was great having you. And for those of you who listen to Up Dog Sports Talk, thank you for tuning in. This was conference number 2 of our 10, going through all 10 conferences for our predictions. Stay tuned. We'll be having more come your way and NFL previews as well. Have a good one, everybody.